Hello, my name is Dan Costa. I am the technical manager of the CERT National Insider Threat Center here at the Carnegie Mellon Software Engineering Institute. I'm joined for this presentation by my colleague, Carrie Gardner. Carrie, hello.
Hi, Dan.
And in this talk, we're going to be presenting some research that we are doing in the space of applying text analytics to the domain of insider threat detection. Our team has been collecting and analyzing insider incidents for almost 20 years and using the foundation of knowledge that we gather about how insider incidents tend to evolve over time to help organizations find the best strategies for managing insider risks within their own organization. And across this research, one of the things that we found is just the breadth of issues and different ways that insider threat concerns pop up for organizations, or really what organizations kind of think of when they define insider threats for their operational environments. So, Carrie, we really used this imagery to help folks start to wrap their heads around just what we mean when we're talking about the insider threat and what organizations should think about when managing their own insider risk.
Absolutely. Yeah. So as it lays out here, the breadth of insider threat spans so many different types of people, internal assets, and intentionality, right? So, the types of people in scope are everyone with authorized access. So all the full-time employees, part-time employees, and then everyone who falls under the trusted business partner category, right? So contract employees, temporary employees, you name it, if they have authorized access, they're in scope here, right? And it's how they use that authorized access, in working with the internal resources, that's how, exploitation happens, right? That's how the insider threat events happen. So it's affecting the people, the information, the technology, the facilities. And it's when they begin to intentionally or unintentionally negatively affect the organization, right? Where we see these different types of insider threat scenarios play out. And some of these patterns that we've identified through our analysis of the rich corpus that we collected span from everything from fraudulent activity of, personal identifiable information to workplace violence, to cyber sabotage, right? Creating like a denial of service attack. To perhaps more common exfiltration, right? Whether it's, intellectual property or classified material. The scope spans, and at the end of the day, it's all about, intentionally or not, misusing authorized access to negatively affect the organization.
Yeah, one of the things that we always tell folks is it's at the heart of kind of whatever your organization considers their definition for insider threat is this fundamental concept of misuse of authorized access. And that is really what differentiates kind of insider threats and insider incidents from incidents involving external attackers, where their whole game is to gain unauthorized access to your critical assets. When it comes to managing insider risk, we're talking about the protection of the authorized access to our organization's critical assets. And the ways that those misuse cases of that authorized access can progress vary quite differently for insider threats and for insider incidents, as opposed to kind of external attackers and incidents involving kind of folks outside of that trust relationship that we've established with organizations. So in the insider threat research domain, this is kind of our version of the cyber kill chain, right? This is what we call the critical path of insider risk, developed over years with a variety of different collaborators from the behavioral and social sciences. And what it really shows is the progression of kind of how the incidents that we've studied have evolved as a function of time. And to summarize it, this is what primarily differentiates external attackers from kind of insider threats and insider incidents, which is with insiders, those that have authorized access to our organization's critical assets, we have much more visibility into their behavior, their activity, the context around harmful acts that malicious insiders go on to perpetrate versus external attackers. the other key difference is these are our colleagues, our coworkers, our employees. These are folks we've already entered into trust relationships with. And in the average case, we want to support, protect these folks, support folks who are experiencing and demonstrating concerning behaviors and activity. That in our research, we've seen precede the harmful acts that malicious insiders have gone on to carry out against organizations. So we have a lot broader set of potential response options, both reactive and proactive, to not only harmful acts associated with insider incidents, but the concerning behaviors and activity that precede those harmful acts. In the insider incidents we've studied, the organization took some problematic response to those concerning behaviors, to include not noticing them all. And those problematic organizational responses are really opportunities for improvement for our organization's security practices, for our organization's management practices. And those are things, management practices are not things we typically think of as being good controls for mitigating risks associated with external attackers and external threat actors. But those are vitally important for mitigating insider threats and for managing insider risk. So due to that fundamental difference between how incidents evolve and the relationship we have with the different classes of threat actors, we have a much broader set of controls that we consider when it comes to insider threat prevention, detection, and response.
Absolutely. And context matters, right? And so this is where text analytics really comes into play, I think. Is its ability to synthesize, extract, the situation behind the event, the problem, right? So when we're doing digging, as an insider threat analyst, we want to get the full picture, right? Or a more clear picture of the situation. So laid out here are some different tools and techniques of applying text analytics to the insider threat domain. So it's everything from recognizing entities, right? So are we able to identify references to particular people, processes, documents, or situations? Are we able to classify the standalone event, the description, the record into a known list of categories? And that's particularly useful when we're thinking about prioritizing, events or situations based upon known patterns in that text. Then it, goes into perhaps some more psychosocial behavioral aspects, right? So can we measure and detect indicators of sentiment, emotion, right? Are we able to get at maybe some disgruntlement? And, that context does vary based upon your population and really thinking about organizational systems and structures regarding, applying the, sentiment detection techniques. And at the bottom here, we have detect concepts where we're thinking about how can we pull out themes, topics, ideas in that natural language. And, that also helps us kind of digest, what are the things that people are talking about, right? So when I think about incident response, I want to get more detail about perhaps some communications or concerning an event. And so, if we've already identified a particular event that's suspicious, being able to apply sentiment or concept detection gives us more insight into the situation. And then finally, generate summaries. This is, forward-looking, and we're starting to see this technology play out with chatbots and, more product development, natural language processes. But for insider threat and cybersecurity, being able to generate and digest natural language from across different events and log streams to write-ups of policies will be able to help us synthesize the context and generate an actionable, readable summary from someone else to take advantage and look at. So many different types of tools and techniques here. And I think, Dan, in the next slide, we have some use cases of applying these techniques.
Yeah, certainly, Carrie. And I think maybe just a broad statement to kind of get us started as we think about how we see text analytics potentially being applied to insider threat detection use cases, and how we currently see it applied in practice and kind of where we think things are going. For insider threats, the types of data sources that analysts are traditionally working with are very unstructured. So we're dealing with lots of unstructured text from things like incident reporting tools, confidential and anonymous reporting systems, unstructured text from things like email or chat logs. There's a variety of different places where we get lots and lots and lots of unstructured text from. So to be able to make sense of that unstructured text at scale, and especially at enterprise scale, we're really relying on, we need tools and tooling to help us from an analysis perspective. And so what you've got up here is a couple of ideas that we've helped organizations kind of think through how they can apply some text analytic capabilities to some of these different use cases. And then maybe as we continue the discussion, we can kind of circle back to kind of the state of the practice right now and show maybe some ideas for future directions. So Carrie, maybe you can get us started walking through some of these, and we can talk about some of the advantages and maybe limitations of some of these approaches as well.
Absolutely. So I think the first one's actually one of my favorites, document tagging. So can we automatically tag documents with the appropriate data classification policy, right? So we're able to identify things that are intellectual property, that are classified, that are sensitive based upon the content of the document from an automatic text analytics process. So there's different ways to go about the operationalization of that. The first way, you have the crawl, walk, and run. So the most basic approach is to have a keyword list of those sensitive terms, right? So we know what our internal resources are. We know what our product list is. So that could be a controlled vocabulary of, if I see these words leave, an asset in an organization, that's just a basic DLP rule, right? And most, organizations are comfortable with that. Well, the next level up on the crawl or the walk stage would be able to automatically classify our documents based upon the words that are contained within them, right? So now that we have a known set of documents that are classified, can we apply, some type of machine learning classification algorithm to detect automatically similar and like documents, right? Automatically tagging documents based upon perhaps some keywords or similar terms that are used inside. And then the next step on a run is, not only the known words, but the similar words, right? So then we're trying to apply the more advanced generative embedding natural language processing techniques where, maybe it's clustering where we're identifying something that's anomalous, that's not like other documents. But essentially what we're getting at is being able to automatically detect sensitive files and tagging them appropriately to aid what we know is sensitive.
Yeah, love the crawl, walk, run analogy here. When it comes to kind of the state of the practice right now with data loss prevention solutions, we have some runners, but there's even still work to do to kind of refine the interpretability of some of the findings of those algorithms, where we're good at drawing kind of circles around things, but then finding ways to label those buckets that we've drawn can still be a significant challenge for analysts, and then making useful kind of clusters or useful buckets of information. Determining the distance to or similarity from kind of our proprietary information also really relies upon kind of mining knowledge from the owners of the process, the owners of the intellectual property. And that can be challenging, time consuming, for organizations to find ways to codify into their detection mechanism. So, there seems to be work to do to find a balance between these supervised and unsupervised approaches, kind of identifying our organization's crown jewels. And a balanced approach seems to be where many organizations are headed in the future.
Absolutely. And we like to think about these, technologies as decision support systems, right? So they're working hand in hand with the analyst or data scientist or an expert and making the choice, right? And providing that context. So for all these use cases and for all the examples that we generally talk about, text analytics is that support mechanism, right? It's, perhaps giving some description, tagging some additional information, and it's up to the user of those systems to be able to decide how to appropriately handle the event or the alert.
Yeah. Carrie, talk about the decision support kind of system in the context of the use case of employee and workforce satisfaction we've got listed here, because I think that's a really good example of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, most people now have seen, Twitter sentiment, right? Very popular use case. Can we identify, angry tweets or happy tweets, positive tweets or negative tweets? And, there's the description element of, okay, so I think I found, some words that are negative, right? But how do you take action on that, right? That's kind of where, for an organization, the line starts to get drawn where, okay, so maybe these systems are able to identify some concerning or negative sentiment and internal communications. How we decide to use that information, we want to have, codified policies around it, right? So we want to make sure that, we've identified perhaps that there's an event that's taking place, or maybe we're only going to use that information in aggregate to, get a sense of overall tone and culture concerns, right? So that's where we're not looking at individual users per se, but we're looking at sentiment across the organization to assess maybe there's overall, there's negative tone happening right now. So maybe we need to apply, some more incentives, or we need to have more, internal resources being used to help the situation.
Yeah, really good stuff. And I think the social media monitoring use case follows a lot of those same kind of parallels. In that one, I think also highlights kind of the need to reiterate when we're considering the application of these new text analytic techniques to data sources for different use cases, within insider threat programs in particular, it's important that consideration, that exploration be done with an understanding of the realm of what is not only possible technically, but within your organization's legal and regulatory and compliance and privacy and civil liberty protections based set of frameworks. Right? So when we're considering things like social media monitoring and really any of the applications of text analytics to these insider threat use cases, it's important that insider threat analysts, insider threat program practitioners, security practitioners more broadly, do this in concert with the folks that have that subject matter expertise to know where the line is in terms of the authorized and unauthorized uses or application of these different analytic techniques, these different decisions.
I was just going to say, that's just, another best practice that we preach, right, is that insider threat programs can't operate in a silo, that, they're working across organizational functions, particularly with legal and HR, to ensure that, the controls they put in place and implement, are abiding by regulatory requirements and also are abiding by, HR cultural expectations, right, and promoting that positive workplace environment.
I think the last one that we had up here also just shows kind of another really good operational use for text analytics and insider threat analysis, which is helping us to count. We get unstructured data, even in terms of the description of the incidents that our organizations experience. And we've used text analytics within our team to help us more effectively and efficiently categorize or label the incidents that we use for our empirical research. And we're starting to see more organizations roll out capabilities like that to help them just wade through their incident data so that they can inform threat likelihood determinations, tweak detective controls, base rates of occurrence, and do a better job at counting and making sense of this unstructured data. So we're just starting to scratch the surface of how we apply text analytics to a myriad of insider threat challenges. Carrie, how do organizations get started applying text analytics to insider threat programs?
Great. So I think the first step, is surveying manual processes that are leveraging some type of unstructured or semi-structured data set, right? And then, working with an expert, maybe a data scientist, to identify opportunities for automation, right? So how can we, take this data, maybe it's internal communications, maybe it's some audit logs, and apply some text analytics capability, to process this information, to analyze it, to make it, actionable and useful for the line analyst, for the manager, or whomever the audience is, right? So I think it's about identifying manual processes that leverage and rely upon unstructured and semi-structured data. And then, kind of working with the experts to understand what's possible and, what can be done within your organization.
Great. Fantastic. Well, I think we should bring this one in for a smooth landing here. Want to highlight a couple of things. One, for more information, we've got a 3-post blog series out on our website that can help organizations better contextualize and understand the variety of different use cases. So for more information, strongly point you in the direction of the link underneath of Carrie's name here. And Carrie, I want to thank you for the conversation. That was tremendous.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you. Thanks for watching.
And now let me welcome Dan, Costa, and Carrie Gardner to their live Q&A. Dan, Carrie, welcome.
Shane, thanks for having us. Glad to be here.
So lots of questions coming in for you both, so we'll just dive right into the first one. I'm going to address this one to you, Dan, but if it's for Carrie, feel free to transfer it over. Can you describe to us why now for using text analytics for insider threat?
Yeah, so now's better than never. There's a couple of reasons why now is a good time, as better than any, for organizations to consider adopting text analytics into their insider threat program operations. The tooling is catching up. So some things that were maybe less commercially available a handful of years ago are starting to become more commercially available. Some of the tools and techniques just around broader text analytics areas like text summarization, natural language understanding, right? These things are catching up and starting to be applied to a really broad set of applications. And because of that, now is a good time to consider how viable incorporating some of those capabilities into an insider threat program is. False positives are down. It's getting easier to incorporate these techniques into commercially available tooling. And we're just starting to see the emergence of some of these techniques kind of creep into the tool sets that insider threat programs and organizations that are taking data-driven approaches to mitigate insider risk are adopting.
Great. And I'll add to that, if you guys don't mind. I think transfer learning has been the biggest boon to, expert text analytics solutions for, a variety of different domains and use cases. Transfer learning has enabled these advanced machine learning capabilities to take advantage of data sets that are out there on the internet. Learning, what does language mean by reading Wikipedia articles, by taking advantage of Onto Pronto and other types of data sets that are online. And so the top natural language processing researchers at different institutions have been able to train these models based on these open data sets and then provide pre-trained models that are readily available for researchers and practitioners to take advantage of. And then they're able to subsequently train those models on particular solutions. So that's where you don't necessarily have to have that labeled data in-house to start right away by executing on text analytics problems.
It's a good point. Shane, maybe just another point to add there, right? The data is catching up as well, right? So we're seeing organizations deploy more sensors that can capture this information that'll allow us to apply all these new text analytics capabilities to it, right? So it's twofold, right? The analysis techniques are starting to work their way into the commercially available tooling, and more organizations are deploying sensors that'll allow them to gather this data in the first place. So that is the perfect combination for kind of why now is the good time to be considering some of these. We've been tinkering around and toying with a lot of these capabilities in the lab for years here at CERT. And we're starting to see the opportunity for organizations to kind of apply some of those best practices to the data that they have and the tooling that they have available to them now.
Great. We'll move on to the next one. We'll pose this one to Carrie, but Carrie, if it's for Dan, same setup. Feel free to pass over to him. What are some of the strongest indicators of insider threats in an organization?
All right, that could be monitored and detected, let's say, with a text analytics solution. All right, so let's say, there's some disgruntled employee who now is really overtly, showing some of these signs that, he may carry out or she may carry out some negative actions, right? And so maybe that comes in the form of some internal communications on, an instant message application or through an email. Or maybe they're actually, in person, back in the office situation, they're displaying some inappropriate behavior. And essentially, in either of those scenarios, there's an opportunity there, whether it's in a written communication document or that's being tipped off in a suspicious activity reporting channel, for a text analytics solution to be trained to detect or at least identify what is suspicious behavior or malicious behavior, and to raise that to the analyst's awareness, right? So we want to alert on the fact that we had some employee essentially suggest that they were struggling with the situation or they're acting out, and so we can then train to at least identify those particular observables and raise that to the analyst awareness, in which case the analyst has discretion to, decide whether or not that's something that's worth investigating further. But the example I really like there to dig a little further is on the suspicious activity reporting. So, most organizations have some type of channel for that, whether that be an email chain, or perhaps voicemail. And so someone then tips off that channel that something had occurred, and you have a transcript of that, you have some email record of that, and now you could apply text analytics to that particular communication channel to essentially identify and classify even particular observables that map back to the organization's potential risk indicators.
And anything to add from your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely, Shane. I think just in general, right, across the different incident types for insider attacks that we've studied over the past 20 years, we've seen great variance in the way that those different types of incidents evolve over time. Now, the two strongest signals across those different types of incidents, fraud, theft of intellectual property, IT system sabotage, national security espionage, that there's very little kind of common connective tissue between those in terms of the things that commonly occur. But there are two. They are a history of policy or rule violations, so repeated rule breaking, and having a history of having done the thing, the fraud, the theft of IP, before in the past. So you've done this before, or you're really bad at following the rules, or you have a disregard for them. And it's pretty easy to think about kind of how we would deploy text analytics in both of those kind of high-level examples when we drill down towards kind of working with the data we have within our organizations. Carrie mentioned things just like how we write up policy violations or someone's history of kind of rule break and rule violation. Right? Those end up in relatively unstructured data sets. Right? But the pieces of information in there, if we find a way to parse them, are super valuable pieces of information to incorporate into an insider risk analysis process. So from our perspective, for just those two things, the juice is worth the squeeze.
Great. So I'm going to pose this one to you, Dan, and then Carrie will come to you for any follow-up. But one is a comment from Discord that I'll read, and then a question from Zoom that just to see if you guys can touch on both. The comment from Discord was, this is such a controversial topic, and they're hesitant to ask questions that will end up in the privacy rabbit hole. So that's our comment. Then the question from Jim in Zoom was asking, you briefly mentioned that there are some regulations that cover things like social media monitoring. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so Carrie, I'll let you take the second question about kind of the specific regulations. Before that, Maybe just a couple of quick comments on kind of this being a controversial topic or heading down the privacy rabbit hole. Insider threat program operations can be a controversial topic within your organizations if you go about it the wrong way. And going about it the wrong way means trying to do this on your own as a low-level analyst without the consult, the approval, the governance, and oversight of the folks that should make up the enterprise-wide participation within your insider threat program. You've got to have an understanding of the legal, regulatory, and privacy rights and protections that need to be put in place and need to be maintained while we're collecting and analyzing data to say something about the absence or presence of potential insider risk indicators within our organizations. You've got to make sure that every time you change the way that you collect or analyze data, or you change a combination of data source and analytic techniques within your insider threat program operations, that change is put back through that same process to make sure that this is an authorized way to collect data, this is an authorized use of the collected data, and authorized by the people in your organization that have the expertise and the authority to make those determinations. So for folks where we see folks kind of go off the rails and get these things wrong is by not finding the way to incorporate that expertise kind of into their operations. So try to do this in a vacuum. That's the easiest way to get yourself into trouble.
Great. And then, on the regulation piece, this very much varies with the organization that you're in, the population that's, under or covered by monitoring, and then the jurisdiction that you're in as well, right? So here in the U.S., we, don't have the GDPR-like regulatory regime. We don't necessarily have a national level set of requirements regarding privacy, right? So it also then, gets further, the step down would be on the organization level. Is this a classified operation, or is this, in the private sector, right? And so there's different rules in those different types of organizations with regards to what can be looked at and how can that be looked at. In general, we can say that in classified environments and then public service organizations and agencies, there's a lot more room and flexibility, but also I would say it's kind of because counterintelligence and that type of monitoring has been a little bit more accepted. So there's pre-existing authorities and norms wrapped around the fact that, we do need to look at different factors regarding a user's susceptibility, and that may include social media monitoring. And, you see that play out in the course of a clearance adjudication process, right, where the investigators are going through and interviewing acquaintances of subjects and other contacts, and that now, start to include things like social media. So in that, sector, that has been more normalized, and, there's more examples of the appropriate ways to take that type of monitoring. In private industry, though, as we engage with different private industry stakeholders, we have seen them take advantage of reviewing social media activity as well as other types of activity online. But it also comes into play as, at what stage are you looking at that information, right? So there's a difference between using that in the employment screening process versus using that, let's say, in the investigation vetting process, right? So once an inquiry has been established, it's a different matter if you're trying to consider social media information to vet a particular incident than it is to consider that type of information on whether or not a particular candidate is susceptible to, malicious activity, let's say. So that's where we kind of see the line start to get drawn when private industry in particular starts to consider whether or not they want to, leverage social media information. But that's a big topic. That's something that, in the insider threat work here at CMU is really starting to dive into further. And privacy is a growing area of work, and that's something that we are, trying to engage more with and make sure that we are, able to, talk to that and also get our work out there in the public realm.
Great. Thank you for that, Carrie. I know we're about a minute over, but I was going to try to work in one more question, and then we can release you guys at Discord because we got lots of great questions coming in for you guys. But we'll throw one more at you if we can get an answer from. After the sentencing of the disgruntled ex-Cisco employee, do you see insider threat continue to be a common problem moving forward? Could their reciprocation and attribution be enough to dissuade?
Yeah, so the data that we've collected over the years tells us that about 1 out of every 4 to 1 out of every 5 cyber crimes that an organization experiences is perpetrated by an insider. So this is an enduring challenge from our perspective, right? Because at the nature of the issue here is the non-0% chance that the folks that you've given authorized access to your organization's critical assets will misuse that access either on purpose to cause you intentional harm or by accident, right? As they proceed through the use of their authorized access on a day-to-day basis with conducting their day-to-day activities, right? So it's an enduring problem. We've been at this for 20 years. And again, it's never going away because you open yourself up to this risk by the nature of giving someone authorized access to your critical assets. The only way to reduce this risk to zero is to stop giving your employees authorized access to your critical assets, which means stop doing business, right? So this is an enduring problem from our perspective, and it's an issue of risk management, right? How do we reduce the impact and likelihood of the misuse of that authorized access to acceptable levels within our organizations? So that is very much an ongoing and enduring challenge from our perspective.
And I'll add just one thing to that, Dan. It's a growing problem, right? So in our definition of insider threat, it includes authorized users, and that includes third parties, that includes contractors and subcontractors. So think about the recent headlines in cybersecurity is SolarWinds, right? So think about the supply chain vulnerabilities and how does that factor into insider threat risk management? So I definitely see that this is not just an enduring problem, but this is a potentially growing area of cybersecurity risk management work.
Dan and Carrie, thank you so much. We're out of time, but thank you so much for sharing your expertise and bringing it to FlowCon. We greatly appreciate it, and we hope to see you over in Discord handling some more questions.
We'll be there. Looking forward to continue the discussion.
Thank you.